لله رب العالمين وعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له الملك الحق مبين وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وختم النبيين إمام المتقين وصلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to take a look at a story that I think all of us know. And it's the story about the three messengers and Surah Yaseen. Before we begin, inshallah ta'ala, I want to just make some brief comments in relation to the particular surah from which Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen, rahimahullah ta'ala, had mentioned in his tafsir. So Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen, he said, قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى سورة ياسين مكية إلا قوله وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا الآية أو مدنية. So Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala, in relation to this surah of the Qur'an, the 36th surah, he said the mu'allif, and what he means by this, the author, he means Jalaluddin Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ahmed ibn Muhammad al-Muhalli, who is the author of the Tafsir Jalalain, along with his student Talmizuhu Jalaluddin Suyuti. Can you hear me?
No.
No. So he said that the author mentioned that this particular surah of the Qur'an is Makkiyah or Madaniyah. He said that except for the saying of Allah, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَنْفِقُوا. المكي ما نزل قبل الحجر وليس ما نزل بمكة. He said that the verses that are Meccan verses is what has been sent down before the Hijrah, before the migration to Medina. And he said it's not that which is sent down in Mecca only. And he goes on to say that if it's sent down in Mecca بعد الحجرة ويكون مدنيا. He said if it's sent down in Mecca after the Hijrah, then the verse is a verse or a Medinan verse. Although it's in Mecca, but if it's after the Hijrah and it's sent down in Mecca, it is a verse that is a verse of Medina. He said, and if it's sent down قبل الهجرة فهو مكي. If it's sent down before the Hijrah, then it's a Meccan verse. And he said, what's sent down after it is a Medinan verse. And he says, وهذا قول هو رجاح من أقوال أهل العلم. And he said, this is the most preferred statement from the scholars in relation to this particular surah. He said there are three statements from the scholars. والأقوال في هذه السورة ثلاثة. There are three statements from the scholars about this particular surah. He says, الأول أنها مكية. That the first opinion from the scholars is that this particular verse that talks about the three prophets or the three messengers, it is a Meccan verse. الثانية أنها مدنية. The second opinion is that it is a Medina verse or Medina surah. And the third opinion, أنها مكية إلا قوله وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا. He said, and the third opinion is that it is a surah that is a Meccan surah, except the verse وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا. So he said the three opinions are that one, either it's a Meccan verse, a Meccan surah, or a surah from Medina, or it is a Meccan surah except the verse وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَنْفِقُوا. But he said the most apparent view is that it is a Meccan verse. He says, لِأَنَّ أَسْلُوبَهَا أَسْلُوبَ الْمَكِّي. He said because the mode or the manner of this particular surah, it has that mode of a Meccan surah. So the Sheikh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions about Surah to Yaseen, that this surah is a surah that is a Meccan surah. It's revealed in Mecca. So I think all of us are familiar with the story of the messenger sent to a particular town, and the man coming running from the furthest part of the town. But I think that there's some details that need to be discussed or understood for us to get a full understanding of this particular story or this surah. So with that, inshallah ta'ala, I'm going to take a look at the various tafsir from Imam Tabari, Sheikh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen, Imam Qurtubi, wa kadhalik, inshallah ta'ala. And we pray that Allah Azza wa Jal grants us the tawfiq to convey the message in a very clear manner, inshallah ta'ala, in a very brief manner so we can get the full meaning, inshallah. We're going to summarize it because there's so much to be said about it from what the ulama have mentioned. We're going to kind of summarize it, inshallah ta'ala, so we won't lose the essence of the story, inshallah. So please be patient with me, and I hope that Allah Azza wa Jal grants me the tawfiq, and I hope that He grants all of us benefit, inshallah ta'ala, from this blessed gathering tonight, inshallah. So as we know, in Surah to Yaseen, beginning at the 13th ayah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلًا أَصْحَابَ الْقَرْيَةِ إِذْ جَاءَهَا الْمُرْسَلُونَ. And put forward to them a similitude, the story of the dwellers of the town, when there came messengers to them. Is my voice clear?
اي نعم واضح ما شاء
الله. Am I going too fast?
لا.
No. So واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون. And put forward to them a similitude, the story of the dwellers of the town, when there came messengers to them. إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون. And we sent to them two messengers, then they belied them both. So we reinforced them with a third. And they said, verily we have been sent to you as messengers. قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون. And they, meaning the people of the town, they said, you are only human beings like ourselves. And the most gracious Allah, the most merciful, has revealed nothing. You are only telling lies. قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لا مرسلون. So these messengers said, our Lord knows that we have been sent as messengers to you. وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. And our duty is only to convey plainly, meaning the message. And to save time, inshallah ta'ala, over to the verse where it comes and says, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ And there came a man running from the furthest part of the town. And he said, O my people, obey the messengers. اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم محتدون. Obey those who ask no wages of you and who are rightly guided. So inshallah ta'ala, we're going to go back and we're going to look at the story of these three messengers. Who were these three messengers that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent? What did the Salaf say about this? What did the great scholars of Qur'an say about this? What did Tabari say? What did Qurtubi say? What did Sheikh Muhammad Salih Uthaymeen say? Ibn Kathir? What did the great explainer of the Qur'an, Ibn Abbas, Tarjuman of Qur'an, what did he say? What did his students say? Qatada and the Dahak and the likes of them. What did they say about these particular verses? So we can have a full story of who these messengers were. And who was this man who came running from the furthest part of the town? What made him run to the furthest part? What made him run from the furthest part of the town to defend these messengers? So inshallah ta'ala, with Allah's tawfiq, we're going to begin. Am I clear?
Now, alhamdulillah.
Now, so inshallah, we start with Imam Tabari, inshallah, who of course, he was a great scholar of tafsir. And his tafsir is well known. Is well known. Unfortunately, it's not in the English language that I know of. But nonetheless, you have Ibn Kathir in reality, which is a summarization of, you can find that in Tabari and also Qurtubi. So, Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Jarir ibn Yazid al-Tabari, who died in 310 after the Hijrah. 310 after the Hijrah, which is equivalent to 923 in the Kafir calendar. So when it said وَضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلًا أَصْحَابَ الْقَرْيَةِ إِذْ جَاءَهَا الْمُرْسَلُونَ. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he puts forth an example. The story of the dwellers of the town when it came to them messengers. So Imam Tabari, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said about this that اختلاف أهل العلم في هؤلاء الرسول وفي من كان أرسلهم إلى أصحاب القرية فقال بعضهم كانوا رسل عيسى ابن مريم وعيسى الذي أرسلهم إليهم. So Imam Tabari, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said about these messengers that Allah talks about in the Qur'an that it is a difference amongst the scholars in relation to these messengers. He said those who were sent to this particular town. He said some of the scholars say that these messengers, they were messengers sent by Isa ibn Maryam. They were messengers sent by Isa ibn Maryam. So Isa, he said Isa is the one in which who sent them to this town. And he said, to further clarify, he said, we mentioned some narration. And he said that حدثنا بشر قال ثناء يزيد قال ثناء سعيد and Qatada. So he brings a narration that ends with Qatada, who is one of the tabi'een, who is a student of Ibn Abbas. And Ibn Abbas was called Tarjuman of Qur'an. He was the interpreter of the Qur'an. He said, Qatada said that واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما. To the end of the ayah. He said that this is Isa ibn Maryam بعد رجلين من الحواريين إلى انطاكية مدينة بالروم فكذبوهما فأزاحهما بثلاثة فقالوا إن إليكم مرسلون. So he said that Qatada said that when Allah mentioned about these messengers that were sent, he also said that, or Tabari brings as a proof, that it was Isa ibn Maryam, who sent two men from his helpers to that town, and he said that town was called Antakiya, which is Antioch. If you translate it to English, it'd be Antioch, which is is ancient Greco-Roman civilization, which is now modern-day Turkey. So Tabari says that Qatada says that these messengers that were sent, they were sent by Isa ibn Maryam. He sent two men to Rome, to the ancient Greco-Roman civilization, Antakiya or Antioch. And they belied these messengers, so therefore he strengthened them with a third one. Then he goes on and he brings another narration. And this narration ends with Ikrama. And Ikrama is also a student of Ibn Abbas. We say وَضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلًا أَصْحَابَ الْقَرِيَّةِ. And Allah puts forth an example of the dwellers of the town. Ikrama said that it is also Antakiya or Antioch. It is Antioch, which is as I mentioned, the ancient Greco-Roman civilization, which is now can be in modern day Turkey. Is everybody with me, inshallah?
No.
Am I going too fast?
No.
Am I clear? Am I too loud?
No, just good.
No. So, Ikrama, also a student of Ibn Abbas from the Tabi'een, he mentioned that this place in which the messengers were sent is Antioch. And as Qatada mentioned, also a Tabi'i, student of Ibn Abbas also, he said that it was Isa ibn Maryam who sent two men from his helpers to this Antioch to call the people to Allah, and the people had belied these messengers. And then he also brings the narration from Ibn Abbas, where he mentioned similar, and also Wahab ibn Munabbi, also, where he said that the place where he was sent to is Antakiya, which is Antioch. And he said that there was a Fir'aun from the Fara'ina, or there was a ruler from the rulers whose name was Abatihas ibn Abtihis. And he worshipped the idols. And he was a person of shirk. So Allah sent messengers, 3. And he said these 3 messengers, their names were Sadiq, wa Masduq, wa Salum. And he said, and they went to this town. And they were belied. and Allah strengthened them with a third messenger. And then Tabari says about the ayah, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ. And they came running from the furthest part of the town a man who said, "O my people, obey the messengers." Now, I want you to listen very carefully, because this man, as we know, as the Qur'an says, he ran from the furthest part of the town, which is one thing. And he ran advising the people to follow the messengers. But what is not known is the state and the condition of this man and who this man was. Because after we know and find out this condition and state of this man, we should pray to Allah Azza wa Jal that He can give us that type of iman and not allow us to make any excuses to call the people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who are close and those who are near in proximity, and near as relates to relatives, which we should start with first, and also the neighbors and those who are far. Because, as mentioned about this man, first and foremost, Tabari says that when it says, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى, there came a man running from the furthest part of the town. He said, وَكَانَ اسْمَهُ, he said, and his name was Habib ibn Murri. His name was Habib ibn Murri. So he says he had a name, and his name was Habib. And this Habib, he was a carpenter. He was a carpenter. And he's also known, this Habib, who was a carpenter, he was also known as Habib al-Najjar. Nabib the carpenter. Habib the carpenter. So he also says that there's another narration from Muhammad ibn Bashar and Sufyan from Asim al-Ahwal from Abi Mujalliz, who said that this man's name was Habib ibn Murri. Habib ibn Murri. This man who ran from the furthest part of the town. So we see that the messengers, that one, the viewpoint of Tabari, from what he gathered and collected, was that these three messengers were sent by Isa ibn Maryam. Two were sent by Isa ibn Maryam first, and then when they belied, then he sent the third by Allah's permission from his helpers. And the name of the man who came running from the furthest part of the town was Habib al-Najjar, Habib the carpenter, or Habib ibn Murri. He also says, this is another narration, that أنه كان رجلا من أهل الأنطاكية, that he was a man who was from this Antioch. وكان اسمه Habib, and his name was Habib, and he worked as a carpenter. And وكان رجلا سقيما, and he was a man that was sick. He was sick, but yet he said still he came down from a door, Bab min al-Abwab, al-Madina, Qasiyan. So although this man was sick, he came from a door from the doors, from the furthest part of the city. And then he said, this man did not place any importance on his sickness, nor on his work, nor on his weakness, but rather he placed importance on doing the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وهو على الباب المدينة الأقصى فجاء يسعى إليهم, and he came from a far place in the town, and he came running to these people to do what? He said, to remind them of Allah, وَيَدْعُوهُمْ إِلَى اتِّبَاعَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ, and to call them to follow the messengers, to obey the messengers. فَقَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ. So we see that this Habib, this man that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said he came running from a further part of the town. Now we can place a name and a description with that person Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about. So Tabari said that this man was sick. He was a carpenter. He was weak, meaning physically, but yet he didn't place any importance on his health, on his sickness, on his weakness, on his wealth, but rather he placed importance of doing the work of his Rabb. To the point it made him run to the further place. And then he said also, he brings another narration that ends with Ibn Abbas, that he said, أنه كان يقول كان اسم صاحب Yaseen Habib. That he said that Ibn Abbas said that the name of the person in Yaseen, his name was Habib. But then he goes on to say, also this man, he had leprosy. He had leprosy. So not only is he sick, weak, he had leprosy, but yet and still, this man, he didn't place any importance on none of that. He placed importance on doing the work of his Rabb. And he ran to the furthest part of the city. And Tabari says, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى. So when this man came running from the first part of the city, he said also, bring another narration from Qatada, that his name was Habib. And he said, وَكَانَ فِي غَارٍ يَعْبُدُ رَبَّهُ. He said, and this man, he used to worship Allah in a cave. He stayed in a cave where he worshiped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when he heard about these messengers, he said, أَقْبَلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. He accepted them. He accepted the message of these messengers. So this is what Tabari says. So, inshallah, we're going to turn to Qurtubi, inshallah. And it's a little shorter. Like I said, I'm summarizing it, inshallah. Everything's good?
No.
No. So, Imam Qurtubi, he says, واضرب له مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون. So when Allah strikes the example of these messengers that were sent to this town, Imam Qurtubi said, وقيل, it is said that it is Isa, بعثه إلى أنطاكية, that it was Isa who sent these messengers to Antioch. For what? To call them to Allah. And then he said that لأن عيسى أرسلهما بأمر الرب, that it was Isa who sent these messengers with the order of his Lord. But when was it? وكان ذلك حين رفع عيسى إلى السماء. It was at a time when Isa was being raised to the heavens. At a time when Allah lifted him to the heavens. So Isa has sent these messengers from the Harariyin, from his helpers, at a time when Allah lifted him to himself. Because we know that they killed him not. It was only made to appear, it was mutashabiha. It was only made to appear so. And Sheikh Fawzan, Hafidullah Ta'ala, on a side note about the so-called execution of Isa, Sheikh Fawzan, Hafidullah Ta'ala, he explained it by saying that it was two possible scenarios. Either one, the traitor who tried to turn Isa in, Allah made him look like Isa, and he was sacrificed. He was crucified and not Isa. And Sheikh Fawzan said the other scenario is that Isa went to one of his helpers and said, will you allow Allah to make you look like me for his pleasure? And the helper of Isa said, sure. And Allah made him look like Isa, and they killed him and not Isa. This is what Allah says, mutashabiha. It meaning that it appeared so, but it really did not happen. Because Allah lifted him to himself. So I just wanted to add that additional benefit to what Sheikh Fawzan said about this particular situation, this scenario with Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. But nonetheless, Imam Qurtubi said that Isa was the one who sent these messengers to Antioch. And it was at a time when he was being lifted to Allah. And when it says كَذَّبُوهُمْ, and they belied the messengers. Qurtubi said that when it said in this verse, فَكَذَّبُوهُمْ, that they belied them, he said that it means that they beat them and put them in prison. They beat them and put them in prison. And he says, where it says, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى. When Allah said that, and a man came rushing from the furthest part of the town. He said his name is هو Habib ibn Mari, وَكَانَ نَجَارًا. So he said the same thing that Tabari says, that his name was Habib ibn Mari, and he was a carpenter. And he says also the same thing that Tabari brings from a narration of Ibn Abbas, that Habib, this man that Allah talked about, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى, that Qatada said that he was a man who used to worship Allah in a cave. And when he heard about the messengers, he went rushing. Keep in mind, he had leprosy, he was weak, he was sick, but he didn't place any importance on his wealth, on his trade, on his weakness, or his sickness. But he placed importance on his Rabb, doing the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this made him run from the furthest part of the town to the place where the messengers were being belied at. Also, he had also the sickness and the weakness of body. So now, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to take a look. And also, Ibn Kathir, he mentioned some of the same things similar, in which Tabari and Qurtubi mentioned. So now we take a look at Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih Al-Uthaymeen and what he mentioned about this particular event that took place with these messengers and this man running from the furthest part of the town. So Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih Al-Uthaymeen, he mentions that the author, he's talking about, as I mentioned, Jalalain, which is the two Jalaluddin. He said that, he mentions that the place was called Antakya, which is Antioch, which I mentioned is the ancient Greco-Roman civilization, which is now modern-day Turkey. I think South Turkey, close to Syria, South Turkey. And Allah Ta'ala a'lam. But he said that the author mentioned this. But Shaykh Uthaymeen, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said that, but Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah ta'ala, he made this statement to be da'if in his tafsir. He said because this place, this town cannot be specified. Cannot be specified. And then he says that where it mentions it's Ja'aha al-Mursalun, when he sent the messengers, he said the author mentioned that Isa alayhi salam sent them, as Tabari mentions and Qur'an mentions. But Sheikh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen, he said, "Laysa bi sahih, wala dalil alayhi." He said, this is not authentic. Okay, there's no evidence upon it. There's no evidence that states that this is the case. And then he goes on to mention the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ. That when Allah mentions that the man came running from the furthest part of the town, he also mentioned that the author mentioned that his name was Habib al-Najjar. Habib the carpenter. Habib the carpenter. So he was a carpenter. So we see that Tabari mentions it, Qurtubi, Bakazari. You know, we mentioned the Ibn Abbas, Qatada, Ikrama, the students, the Tabi'een. They mentioned that his name was Habib ibn Mari, which he was a Najjar, also, meaning a carpenter. He was a carpenter. So Sheikh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions, as it relates to it, says, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ. The man that came from the furthest part of the town running. وذلك لأن هذا الرجل كان مؤمنا فسهل عليه أن يأتي من المكان البعيد. He said that when Allah mentioned that the man came running from the furthest part of the town, he said that's because the man was a believer. Therefore, it was easy upon him that he came from a place that was very far. Keep in mind, as Tabari mentions, he had leprosy, he was sick, he was weak in his body, he would concern himself, he did not concern himself about his trade as a carpenter, he did not concern himself about his disease of leprosy, he did not concern himself about the sickness of his body. Only thing he concerned himself was doing the work of his Rabb. So we can see why. Because Shaykh Uthaymeen said that this was easy for him because he was a believer. So it was Iman, the Iman that this man had that made him go forth and leave off all the concerns and worries. So then he goes on to say, يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ. Before I conclude, because we will conclude with this, inshallah ta'ala. Before I conclude, we're going to summarize. So, the messengers Allah mentioned in the Qur'an, there were three. Tabari, Qurtubi, and others mentioned that these three were sent by Isa ibn Maryam. May Allah be pleased with them both. And Qurtubi added that at a time when Allah lifted him to the heavens. And the man who came running from the furthest part of the town, his name was Habib ibn Najjar, or Habib al-Najjar, or Habib ibn Murray, who was a carpenter. And Habib was sick with leprosy and weak in his body. But he did not concern himself with his trade as a carpenter, nor did he concern himself with his weakness of his body, but he concerned himself, as Tabari said, with doing the work of his Rabb. And as Qurtubi mentioned and Tabari mentioned, that this Habib al-Najjar, he used to worship Allah in a cave. As Qatada mentioned, the Tabi'een, the student of Ibn Abbas, that he used to worship Allah in a cave. And it mentioned also that the people of that town, or the ruler of that town, was a pagan worshiper. He was a mushrik. He worshipped idols besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is a summarization of that story. And in closing it up, inshallah ta'ala, Sheikh Uthaymeen, he mentioned, I want to mention these points. It's not per se giving you more information about the story, but it's giving us an etiquette or some etiquette of how we could address the non-Muslim when calling them to Allah. He said, Ya qawmi, ittabi'u al-mursalin. So he said that, oh my people, take note, oh my people, follow, obey the messengers. Shaykh Uthaymeen, he did not say, Ya ahl al-suflaha. He didn't say, oh foolish people, or Ya ahl al-juhal. He didn't say, oh ignorant people. He said, Bel qala ya qawmi. Rather, he said, oh my people. Why he said? Because of his love for them and his gentleness for them. But he did not say, Ya ikhwani, oh my brothers. لأنه لا إخوة بين المؤمن والكافر. He said, because there's no brotherhood between a believer and a kafir. He says, فهو مؤمن وهم كفار. Because he was a believer and they were kuffar. Lakin, ya qawmi. But he said, oh my people. Oh my people. And he said, Sheikh Uthaymeen goes on to say, yeah, he said, oh my people, ya qawmi, walau kanu kufaran. He said, oh my people, even though they were kuffar. So from this we see that there's no harm in saying to your people, meaning the people that you come from, who are kuffar, oh my people. But you cannot say, oh my brothers, meaning brothers in faith. Because there's no brotherhood between a Muslim, a believer, and a kafir. But you can say, oh my people, because it shows the concern that you may have for them. So he didn't say, oh foolish ones, oh ignorant ones. He said, oh bel, yet qawm, oh my people. So I wanted to conclude with that and say that I hope the Allah Azza wa Jal made it easy for you to understand, meaning not due to lack of understanding, but meaning understand my speech. And I pray that Allah Azza wa Jal makes it weigh heavy on our scale and the benefits for us in this dunya and the akhirah. And I thank our brother Abu Abdus Salam for inviting me once again to share the mutual benefit. And I hope that it was truly a mutual benefit. And I hope I did service to the topic. But nonetheless, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك أقول قولي هذا أستغفر لي ولكم ونصلك في الوقت السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بارك الله فيكم.